Hey, Walter Sorrells back with another Knife Makers Friday 5. Today, 15 years on YouTube. Yeah, so believe it or not, I have been doing YouTube videos for 15 years now. This month is the 15th anniversary of the first video that I ever put on YouTube. I'm going to talk more about that in a minute, but first, a couple of little updates about what's going on in the shop here. First, well, here comes the rain. I was afraid, I was hoping I was going to be able to beat it, but maybe not. Anyway, first thing is, got a new knife coming out. This is a sort of, it's a prototype of it. It's called the Shadow 2. Now the Shadow is kind of a special knife to me. This is the very first Tactics Armory knife that I ever did. For those of you who are not familiar with my Tactics Armory lineup here, I started Tactics Armory about 10 years ago. The original idea, and in fact the original name for Tactics Armory, came from my son, who was about 12 years old at the time. So I guess that's probably 12 years ago. So it was a few years after I started doing videos on YouTube that I started Tactics Armory. All right, one quick thing before I start rambling here. I made a whole bunch of prototypes of the Shadow 2 here, trying out different little profiles and, you know, all kinds of different little details. These will be heat treated and have handles put on them eventually. Anyway, if you'll go by tacticsarmory.com and sign up for my mailing list there, I think it should just kind of prompt you to do that as soon as you get to the website. I will, you know, basically just grab a couple names in the next month or so and send them a free knife. That'll give me a chance to keep you guys updated about what's going on at Tactics Armory, and at the same time, give you a little thanks for hanging out with me here. All right, let me get back to what I was talking about a minute ago. Anyway, the idea of my Tactics Armory knives was that they would be production type knives, very simple designs, no frills, nothing designery really. The intent was to make really, really useful, functional knives. And so this was what the first design was, and this knife right here, which is very similar but subtly different. I think it's a more interesting design, and I'll show more about it in the coming weeks. That's kind of the next thing up for Tactics Armory. I will be putting some of them on pre-order, so you can get them for a few bucks off if you pre-order them. My guess is I'll have my first shipment of them going out in 2, maybe 3 weeks. Got most of the CNC work done, and they're pretty much ready to go into production now. Okay, so YouTube. All right, so let me tell you how I actually got started on YouTube. So my start in knife making was really as a Japanese sword guy. I was coming out of a martial arts background. I was interested in Asian culture and Asian martial arts, and so I got started making Japanese swords from that perspective, and that was really my focus for the first 10 years or so that I made knives and swords. So anyway, one of the things that happened early on in my knife making or my sword making career was that I sort of cracked the code of how to make interesting hamones, which is the little temporal line or the hardened edge that you see on Japanese swords. And it's actually a sign of what's going on metallurgically in the steel. It's not just some kind of superficial wiggly line that people put on there just to look cool. It's actually a visual sign of the, you know, what the actual steel is doing, what the smith is building into the functional qualities of the sword. Anyway, I kind of figured that out pretty early on in my sword making career, and I was producing hamones that I thought were pretty cool looking, and evidently a lot of other people did too, because I was constantly getting people emailing me and saying, "Hey man, how do you do your hamones?" So I would just write back this big long email to each one of these people, and I started getting more and more of these things, and I finally realized, like, this is just too much. So I made my first video about a little over 20 years ago, actually. I bought this little HD camcorder, and I stuck it up on a camera tripod that I had because I was, a long time kind of shutterbug, and I started recording this video about how to make jamones. My original intent was just to do something I could just send to people and explain, here's how my jamones are made, give me $5 or $10 or whatever, enough to cover the shipping, and I wouldn't have to answer all these emails. And I ended up producing something that was much more complicated than I had originally intended, and it was pretty well received, and so I got requests to do other kinds of videos like that. So I ended up doing this whole series of videos about making Japanese swords. You can stream them or get DVDs of them. Couldn't stream them back in those days, but you could get DVDs from me, and I still have those today. All these different Japanese sword things, how to forge a Japanese sword, how to make the mountings, fittings, polishing, a whole bunch of other stuff. Anyway, I was selling those on my website, and I heard about this thing called YouTube. It had just come out, and not that many people knew about it. Old farts like me anyway. Kids were using it, but that was kind of it. And so I figured, well, I could post a little excerpt of one of these videos on this YouTube thing and hope to drive some sales of these little DVDs that I was selling on my website. Well, I posted this thing. I didn't really think anything about it. Didn't sell all that many DVDs, maybe a couple, but it didn't seem to make any big difference. 2-3 months later, probably, I went back and I looked, and this video that didn't seem to be getting a lot of traction from my perspective, because I wasn't selling tons of videos, has like hundreds of thousands of viewers. And I was like, wait a minute, there's something I'm missing here. Obviously, there's an appetite for these videos on this YouTube thing, and it's a different thing from these videos that I'm selling on DVD form. So I went ahead and started producing videos. I think the first ones that I did were kind of things about different tools around the knife making shop, and people just kept watching the videos, and I realized that I could use this to kind of market my sword making and knife making business. And 15 years later, I'm still doing it. And it obviously turned into this whole different thing. I never really thought about it in terms of, oh, I'm going to be teaching all these guys how to make knives. I really had no expectations about it at all, to tell you the truth. But now, I got hundreds of thousands of subscribers, and all these people watch these things. I don't know, it's a weird thing. Anyway, that was kind of a long-winded story, but the point of it is that to this day, I'm still producing a video more or less every week. I try to do at least one how to make a knife build every month, maybe even 2 if I can. Those take a lot of time, and so I'm a little hesitant to do more than that. In fact, I couldn't run a knife business and do, 5 of those a month. It just wouldn't, it would take too much time. And frankly, people would give you the indication that you make tons of money by doing videos on YouTube. Not the case at all. I make a few $100, every month doing YouTube videos, but you can't live on a few $100 a month. So anyway, just a few thoughts about YouTube. For those of you who are as old as I am, you'll remember that if you wanted to find out about some obscure thing, stamp collecting, French movies, how to make a silencer for a firearm, just, any kind of obscure knowledge, even things that were pretty common, like fixing up old cars and stuff like that, there just wasn't really a good source of knowledge. You could go to your local library, and maybe there would be one book about how to do the thing that you wanted to do. But most people, learned either in person from some nutty guy who'd spent his whole life, focusing on stamp collecting or how to fix 66 Chevelles or whatever it might be. The other source that you had, if you couldn't find somebody in your town or whatever that could tell you about it, maybe you could go to conventions of 1966 Chevelle enthusiasts or whatever. And there was one other source, and that was newsletters. There used to be this thing called a mimeograph, which anybody under about 30, 50 maybe even, anybody under 50 probably will not remember what a mimeograph is. Every school had one, and some crazy people had them. There was this drum-shaped thing that you would type out a stencil, and it was on this weird carbon paper stuff, and you would put it around this drum, and you would turn this crank, and it would crank out page after page of whatever you had typed onto this stencil. And they'd be kind of clammy and had this weird kind of smell, and the ink was sort of purple. And so people would mimeograph, their little explanation of how to rebuild the carburetor on a 66 Chevelle or whatever it might be, and they would advertise in the back of some kind of magazine, and you would send, back in those days, it was usually like a check for like $4 or something, and that would sign you up for the newsletter. And they would personally fold up these things and stick them in envelopes and put a stamp on them and send them out to everybody on their mailing list. And this was the closest thing there was to YouTube. There were also enthusiast magazines about, whatever, stamp collecting or whatever. But if you really, really wanted to get down in the weeds of something, there just weren't that many sources of information. So when YouTube came along, for people like me and probably like 99% of the people watching this video, if you really wanted to drill down and find out a lot of information about any subject, YouTube was just this amazing thing. And people who are young enough that they've always known YouTube don't realize just how hard it was to get information about anything in the world. And overnight, there were some intermediate things on the internet, chat rooms and forums, and people would set up websites where they'd talk about whatever they're doing. But YouTube was a game changer like nothing. Really, it's like nothing in the history of the world. If you want to know about something, hands-on, tangible, how to make a wooden mallet, there's some guy on YouTube who will tell you how to make a wooden mallet. There might even be 20 people telling you how to make a wooden mallet. Some of them don't know what they're doing. Some of them do. And you can go on there and you can watch 20 people make a wooden mallet. And by the time you're done, you really have a high-level understanding of how to make a wooden mallet. It's in the entire history of humanity, there was nothing like YouTube. And so I feel an incredible sense of gratitude for being able to not only be on here and share things that I know and that I've found out, but also to have learned things from other people. I've got a CNC machine sitting over there. Actually, I got two of them sitting here. If I had not had people like John Grismo and John Saunders and various other people sharing their knowledge about how to make CNC machines do what you want them to do, I could never have run those things. It would have been, the learning curve would have been too steep. But instead, these are now core to my business. This knife is straight off the CNC machine. I ground this a little bit. There are a few things, that I've done to this. Obviously, it's assembled. But basically, this is something that 20 years ago would have been done exclusively with a belt grinder. Today, a lot of guys like me use a CNC machine to do this, and if it weren't for YouTube, no way it'd happen. So last little point I'll make about YouTube is there's a downside to YouTube, which is it's a monopoly. Yes, there are other social media presences out there, TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and all that. But there's nothing that's quite like YouTube. And it completely dominates the market. And what that means is that they can pay people like me whatever they want. They can drop people like me whenever they want. There was a time, probably 5 years ago, and I won't get into all the details, but people call it adpocalypse, where basically they just decided people who make sharp, pointy things, things that go bang, you know, anything that is not in favor with a certain kind of progressive subset of America, who happened to be the guys that ran Google and, you know, YouTube at the time. We're just not going to support those guys, really. And overnight, I mean literally in one night, my ad revenues and the number of people who watched my videos went down by, you know, 400% or something. I mean, it was just a catastrophic fall. There's nothing I could do about it. Happened to lots of other people. Anybody who was doing, you know, firearms related videos, they were just dead like that. You know, this is not my main source of income, and so, you know, it's not the end of the world for me, but it's an important part of my business. So if you're a YouTube person, you're entirely hostage to what the folks at YouTube decide they want to do. And you know, I don't think that's a super healthy thing, because, you know, this is not just a platform for finding out about carburetors on 66 Chevelles or how to make stuff like this. There's a lot of important political speech that goes on in places like this. And as, you know, as social media platforms go, YouTube is pretty good, but still, who wants to have a tiny, tiny little number of people in control of the platforms on which free speech happens, which is what social media is today? Nothing much you can do about it, but I think it's an unfortunate thing. And for all the benefits of YouTube, which are huge, not just to me, but to you guys and to humanity at large, one would wish that there was a little more competition in this space. But that's just the nature of the interconnected world, is that there's this network effect where big, you know, corporations, big enterprises basically take over a space and drive out all the competition, and that's just the way it is. It just seems to be a feature of the internet and computing. Anyway, didn't really mean to go down that rabbit hole, but 15 years on YouTube, I have no plans to quit. I'm still going to be wearing this blue shirt for a while. A little footnote on that. I think I wore the blue shirt even on the very first video that I actually did for YouTube, which was one of these, I believe was one of these videos about tools for knife makers. So the idea of the blue shirt was I could film a whole bunch of stuff on different ways. I'd just throw on the blue shirt whenever I was doing something, and it would look like there was kind of this visual continuity to whatever I was doing. Started to become just a little trademark of mine, and I just kept wearing the blue shirt. Nowadays, you'll see me in the blue shirt sometimes, but not all that much. I was actually going to make a knife out of all my old blue shirts. You know, it's not like there's just one of them. I probably owned 10 or 15 of them over the 15 years I've been on YouTube. And, you know, one of these days, I probably will do what I said I was going to do a couple of years ago, which is to take a whole bunch of these shirts, chop them up, and turn them into knives. How will that happen? Well, wait until I get around to making that video, which history shows is not going to happen anytime soon. All right, guys, well, thanks for sticking with me for these 15 years. I feel an enormous sense of gratitude for all the attention, the millions of hours that people have been watching these videos that I've done. It's an interesting thing, you know, being on YouTube, because I never set out to do this. They did a poll a couple years ago, whoever they are, the people that do the polls. They did a poll a couple years ago where they interviewed 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds, I don't know, something like that. And they asked them what they want to do with their lives, and being an influencer, whatever that is the most popular choice that people had. That's a job category that didn't even exist 15 years ago when I started doing this. And now everybody wants to be on YouTube. It's the weirdest thing in the world. Obviously, I never had any ambition to do this. and yet here I am, and I'm not going anywhere. So thank you guys so much for 15 amazing years on YouTube, and looking forward to, I don't know, quite a few more, I hope. All right, guys, thanks, and keep on making those knives. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe and make sure that you click on that bell so you get notified of all the latest videos. Want to buy a knife from me? Check out my modern blades at tacticsarmory.com. Digging the channel? You can support our video making efforts on Patreon. You know, I've been banging away on these videos for like 10 years, so I hope you'll show some love for all that hard work. Link in the cards and descriptions. Finally, if you're interested in making Japanese swords, check out my full line of Japanese sword videos where I show how to forge Japanese swords as well as how to polish them and how to make fittings, handles, and scabbards. WalterSorrellsBlades.com.